The winter months are a good time to do garden renovation projects or just build new raised beds or add other features to your garden, like maybe some hardscape areas. We're certainly doing a lot of renovation here to our herb garden, and we can't wait to show it to you next year. If you're going to be creating new beds in a Bermuda grass lawn, hopefully you've done like we did back when the Bermuda grass was green and growing and sprayed it with an herbicide to kill it. And that's because if you try to spray it now, you're not going to have very good luck. If you want to create a bed in a warm season lawn, you're going to have to pull out all of those Bermuda rhizomes and stolons, and it can be quite a job. Well, if you did any fall planting this year, any trees, shrubs, or perennials, it's important to keep those well watered if we have a dry period during the winter. Now, this also holds true for any sod. If you've added any Bermuda grass or zoysia grass sod, even though it's dormant, if we have a dry period, it's important to keep it well watered. Well, hopefully all of you are keeping a garden journal, and you can look back through that journal and see what was successful in your garden this last year, and also take note of those things that maybe didn't work out so well, and better plan your garden for next year. One thing I like to do in the winter time is to visit different gardens or go for a walk in the neighborhood and look at all of the plants that give us interest in the winter time, like the Italian arum we've got right here. This is a cool season plant that goes dormant in the summer, that reappears in the fall and gives us these beautiful mosaic or mottled foliaged arrowhead shaped leaves all winter, and they stay pliable even in the coldest weather. Other plants that give us really nice winter interest are some of the trees and shrubs that have showy bark, like the river birch right here. I think it just has wonderful exfoliating papery bark. You can see how it kind of peels off as it gets older, and each year just kind of sloughs off another layer of the bark of the river birch. But there's several trees and shrubs that have outstanding bark to give us something to look at in the wintertime. You can also see really nice winter silhouettes against the winter sky of certain trees and shrubs in the form that they present. After we've had a few hard freezes, we can go out into our gardens and protect our grafted roses. We just take some extra mulch and mound that up around the base of the plant, and we want to get a depth of about 6 to 8 inches at least. This is going to be more important for those of you in the northern part of the state as opposed to those of you who garden in the southern part of Oklahoma. But mound that up, protect that grafted union, and in the spring we can come out and remove this once the rose begins to grow. As for the climbing roses, there are a few things we can do to protect them a little bit during the winter. And one thing we can do is to take some of those canes and tie those up securely so they don't blow about in the wind and cause any rubbing damage to those climbing canes. Each year, the trees on our property give us a nice gift of organic matter whenever they drop their leaves. We can take these leaves and gather them up and put them in our compost pile, or if we want them to decompose a little bit quicker, we could shred them up in some way. Now, one way we can shred our leaves is to take a mower with a bag attachment and just run it over the lawn quite a few times, and that shreds them up pretty well. Put those in the compost pile and they break down a little bit quicker. Now, another good use for our leaves would be to use them as a mulch in some of our bare flower beds or other garden spots. If you have a cool season lawn, it's especially important to keep the leaves and the pine needles raked away. The cool season grasses like fescue, bluegrass, perennial rye, those are all growing rapidly right now, and in the spring also during the cool part of the year. So we need to allow them to have as much light as possible. So keep those leaves, pine needles, and any other garden debris raked up at this time of the year. Well, the tops of our perennials and ornamental grasses are starting to look a little darkened because we've had some frosts, and some gardeners may be tempted to come out and cut all of that away to clean up the garden, but it's important to leave the tops on our grasses and perennials through the winter. This gives them a little bit of extra insulation and protects them from the cold. The leaves and stems themselves help protect the crown or that root area of the plant, and also the leaves and pine needles will kind of blow in and be caught by these stems and help provide a little bit more insulation. Now, all of the tender plants that have been blackened or killed by the frost can be removed from the garden and added to the compost pile. If you noticed any insect problems or disease problems on your annual plantings, you might want to bag those up and set them out in the garbage. There are some annual plants that are a little bit harder to pull out of the ground after they've frozen. Things like begonias and some of our impatiens, they have these stems that can get kind of mushy, and you go to pull them out of the ground and they break off. Well, one thing I like to use to help get them out of the ground is a sharp-tined cultivator. I've got one right here that has the sharp tines, and I'll use this to pull one out of the ground. Now, the sharp-tined cultivator works better than the flat-tined cultivator at getting under the plants. And I'll show you what I mean right here. I'll just take it and I'll just kind of get it underneath the crown of the plant and just pull it out, and you can see you don't even have to bend over, and you've got the plant. You can shake the soil off with the cultivator, and you can just throw that into the wheelbarrow to take to the compost pile. Or if you've noticed what we have on the roots of this plant, these little knots, we're not going to throw this in our compost pile. This is the evidence of root knot nematodes. They've infected the plant, they pierce the root, and they cause this swelling or these knots. The nematodes are tiny little microscopic eelworm-like creatures, and they can really cause a lot of damage. Now, there's not a lot of control once you have nematodes, but one thing you can do is to avoid spreading them to other parts of the garden. So any tools that you use in the places where you notice you have nematodes, like shovels, trowels, our cultivator, even a tiller. Once you use those in those beds, make sure you wash them off immediately. You don't want to transport any soil with the nematodes to other spots in the garden. So if you have those nematodes, bag those plants up, set them out for the garbage. Well, here to give us a few more tips through the months of winter are studio garden manager Laura Payne and consumer horticulturist David Hillock.
During the winter months, we need to make sure we don't forget about our little fine-feathered friends. You want to make sure you keep their bird baths and their bird feeders clean and filled. You'll also want to cut back on the amount of water and fertilizer that you provide your houseplants. Since the short days, they're not growing as much. And the winter months are also a good time to get caught up on your garden reading and planning. There are a wide variety of garden books and garden magazines out there on the market, and they make wonderful Christmas gifts.
Additional winter tips include preparing your equipment and your tools for the winter as well. Now, if you have power equipment, lawnmowers and weed eaters, etc., that are run by gas engines, you want to go ahead and drain the fuel from the tanks and from the lines. You don't want to leave that in through the winter time, because that can gum up inside and then cause problems later on. So drain the fuel out of the tank, run the engine until all the fuel's out of the lines, and then go ahead and store those. The winter months is a great time to get in and repair and fix and get those tools that you have laying around ready for the next year as well. You can sharpen the blades, oil the blades, and then go ahead and store those. Now, if you have irrigation systems, you may want to go ahead and drain the lines so that you can avoid breaking any of the lines due to freezing. And bring in your garden hoses, or at least drain them and disconnect them from the faucets if there's freezing weather predicted, because if you don't, if it's still attached to the faucet, that freezing water can back up into your line inside your home and cause some real problems. Now, there are actually some winter things that you can do to control insects as well. And one of those is using a dormant oil spray. Dormant oil sprays are good on plants that are deciduous, that lose their leaves during the winter time. And using a dormant oil spray when temperatures are above 40 degrees will help control a lot of the insects that are hiding or overwintering in the crevices and the cracks within the bark, such as aphids, spider mites, scale insects, etc. Another method used to control insects during the winter is just tilling the ground. If you have areas that are bare, your vegetable garden or flower beds that you're not planting anything through the winter, you can come in and till the ground once or twice during the winter time. And what this does is that it brings the soil insects that are hibernating down in the soil, brings them to the surface, exposing them to freezing weather, and then killing them. Now, if you haven't had a soil test done in quite a while, then you might want to go ahead and do that. Now is a good time to do that during the early winter months. That way you can get the soil test turned in and get the results back from the soils lab and be able to make adjustments to the soil if necessary before the spring, before you begin to plant. We have publications available through the Cooperative Extension Service that show you how to collect a soil sample and tell you where to turn it in. One of those is Fact Sheet F2207, How to Get a Good Soil Sample. That can be found at your county cooperative extension office, or you can go online at www.oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. You can access that and many other fact sheets through the internet. Another leaflet that's available, L249, Soil Testing, the First Right Step, is also available through your county extension office. As we approach the holiday season, many people will have live Christmas trees in their homes. And you want to make sure that you keep those live Christmas trees wet the whole time. Keep the basin full of water. If you allow those to dry out, it doesn't take much for the tree to shut down and become really dry. And of course, you know that becomes a real serious fire hazard. So make sure you keep them wet the whole time that they're inside. One last tip for you, as the cold weather forces you indoors, that's a good time to pull out the mail order catalogs. Many of them are free by just requesting them through the companies. Sometimes they have a small fee for them, but get them early. That gives you a chance to browse through them, make your selections of either plant material or seed, and then you can get a good order in before the good choices are already gone.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.